I won $600,000 and lost everything that mattered. Turns out money can't buy happiness, but it can destroy it. I never thought winning the lottery would be anything other than a dream come true. But here I am, with more money than I ever imagined, and it feels like my life is falling apart. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 6 months ago, I was just another 28-year-old trying to make ends meet in the city. I worked as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm, lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment, and dated James, everyone called him Jay, my boyfriend of 3 years. Life wasn't perfect, but it was predictable, manageable. That all changed on a Tuesday evening in March when I stopped at Wilson's Corner store on my way home from work. I hadn't planned on buying a lottery ticket. In fact, I rarely gambled at all. But that day had been particularly stressful. Our biggest client had rejected our entire campaign proposal, and my boss had been breathing down my neck all afternoon. Maybe it was the universe's twisted sense of humor, or maybe it was just dumb luck, but something made me hand over that $5 bill to Mr. Wilson for a ticket. "Good luck, Sarah," he'd said with his usual cheerful smile. "Maybe this'll be the one." I'd laughed it off, stuffing the ticket into my purse without even looking at the numbers. For the next few days, it sat forgotten in my wallet, crushed between receipts and loose change. I almost threw it out while cleaning my bag that weekend. A few months ago, when I finally checked those numbers, my whole world shifted on its axis. I was half watching the evening news while working on a new design when the lottery segment came on. Something made me pause and dig out that crumpled ticket. As I compared the numbers, one by one, my heart started racing. I couldn't believe my eyes. I had won $600,000. The room started spinning. I must have read those numbers 20 times, convinced I was hallucinating. When reality finally sank in, I did what anyone would do. I called Jay. "Babe, you need to come over right now," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" He sounded worried. "Just come. Please." Jay lived about 15 minutes away, but he made it to my place in 10. He burst through the door, out of breath, his dark hair disheveled. "Sarah. What's going on?" I couldn't speak. I just handed him the ticket and pointed to the TV, where they were still displaying the winning numbers. Jay's eyes widened as he made the connection. "Holy shit," he whispered. Then louder, "Holy shit. Sarah, do you know what this means?" We were both over the moon that night, staying up until dawn, talking about all the possibilities this money opened up for us. Jay, with his ambitious entrepreneur spirit, immediately started listing all the investments we could make. I was more cautious, thinking about paying off my student loans and maybe putting a down payment on a house. "We could start our own business," Jay said excitedly, his brown eyes sparkling. "Remember that app idea I had? This could be our chance." I nodded along, caught up in his enthusiasm. But even then, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that we should be careful, that we should plan this out properly. The next morning, I called the lottery office as soon as they opened. They verified my ticket and scheduled an appointment for me to come in and claim my prize. The woman on the phone advised me to keep the win quiet until everything was finalized, but Jay had already texted his best friend, Mike. "He won't tell anyone," Jay assured me when I expressed concern. "Besides, we need to celebrate." That night, Mike came over with a bottle of expensive champagne. He was a tall, charismatic guy who worked in finance and always seemed to know about the next big thing. As we toasted to my win, he started talking about investment opportunities. "You've got to think big," he said, gesturing with his champagne glass. "This kind of money, invested right, could set you up for life." Jay was hanging on every word, but something about Mike's enthusiasm made me uneasy. It felt too eager, too practiced. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings with lottery officials, and decisions about how to receive the money. I opted for a lump sum payment after taxes, which brought the amount down to about $380,000. Still life-changing money, but not quite the fortune it had seemed at first. As soon as the money hit my account, the real trouble began. Jay's behavior changed almost overnight. He'd always been somewhat impulsive, but now it was like he'd lost all sense of caution. He quit his job as a software developer the very next day, despite my suggestions that maybe we should take things slow. "Why wait?" he'd said, already browsing luxury car websites. This is our chance to live the life we've always dreamed of. But the dreams he was describing didn't sound like mine. He wanted to move to a penthouse apartment, buy a Tesla, and invest a large chunk of the money in various startups. When I suggested we might want to consult a financial advisor first, his reaction caught me off guard. "Don't you trust me?" he snapped, his face flushing. "I know what I'm doing, Sarah. Stop trying to control everything." That was just the beginning. Jay started spending more and more time with Mike and a new crowd of entrepreneurs and investors who seemed to materialize out of nowhere. They'd go out to expensive clubs and restaurants, with Jay picking up the tab more often than not. He'd come home late, reeking of expensive whiskey, talking about some amazing business opportunity he'd heard about. I tried to be supportive, but I was becoming increasingly worried. In just 1 month, Jay had spent nearly $50,000 on clothes, electronics, and what he called networking events. When I checked our joint account, which I'd foolishly agreed to open, I found charges for things I didn't even recognize. "It's called investing in yourself," he'd say dismissively when I brought it up. "You need to spend money to make money." Then my family got involved, making everything even more complicated. I'd always had a strained relationship with my parents, especially my mother, Patricia. She was a master of passive-aggressive commentary, and my father, Thomas, usually just went along with whatever she said. They divorced when I was in high school but somehow managed to present a united front when it came to making me feel guilty. They showed up at my apartment one Sunday afternoon, unannounced. I hadn't seen them in almost a year, not since last Christmas when my mother had spent the entire dinner critiquing my career choices and asking when Jay and I were going to make things official. "We were in the neighborhood," my mother said, though they lived on the other side of the city. "Can't parents visit their only daughter?" I had a sister, Karen, but in my mother's world, she might as well have been an only child. As they settled onto my couch, I could see them taking in every detail of my apartment, probably noting what had changed since their last visit. My mother's eyes lingered on the new TV Jay had insisted on buying. "Things seem to be going well for you," she said, her tone suggesting this was somehow surprising. "We're managing," I replied cautiously. I hadn't told them about the lottery win, but news travels fast in our community. "Oh, don't be modest," my father chimed in. "We ran into Betty Johnson at church, and she mentioned something about you coming into some money." Betty Johnson was our neighbor growing up, and apparently still the neighborhood gossip. I made a mental note to figure out how she'd found out. "It's not a big deal," I tried to downplay it, but my mother was already launching into her prepared speech. "You know, sweetie, your father and I have been having some financial difficulties lately. The medical bills from his knee surgery last year really set us back, and the roof needs replacing." I sat there, feeling like I was 16 again, as they listed all their financial woes. By the end of their visit, they dropped enough hints to sink a battleship about how much they could use some help, all while assuring me they weren't asking for anything. "We just want you to know what's going on in our lives," my mother said as they were leaving. "That's what family does, right?" The next day, my sister Karen called. We'd never been close, she was 5 years older and had always seemed to resent my existence. Now, suddenly, she wanted to reconnect. "I've been thinking about you so much lately," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We should get together for lunch." I agreed, more out of curiosity than any desire to spend time with her. We met at an upscale restaurant I knew she couldn't afford on her teacher's salary. Sure enough, when the bill came, she made no move to reach for it. "So," she said, stirring her third cocktail, "I hear congratulations are in order." I sighed. "Karen." "No, really, I'm happy for you," she interrupted. "And you know, it's funny timing actually. I've been thinking about going back to school for my master's degree, but with Tommy in college now, we're really stretched thin." Tommy was her son, my nephew, whom I'd met exactly twice in his 18 years of life. Now suddenly, she was acting like we were the closest of sisters. "I always supported you," she continued, her voice taking on an edge when I didn't immediately offer to fund her education. "Remember when you were in college and needed help with your art supplies? I gave you money then." She had, once, given me $20 for art supplies when I was in my freshman year. Apparently, this single act of kindness now entitled her to a significant portion of my lottery winnings. As the demands from my family increased, things with Jay were getting worse. He'd started spending more time at Mike's place, claiming they were working on their business plan. One night, he came home particularly late, practically vibrating with excitement. "Baby, I've got it," he announced, dropping onto the couch beside me. "The perfect investment opportunity." I put down my book, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. "What is it this time?" He either didn't notice or chose to ignore my lack of enthusiasm. "Mike's got this friend, Ryan, who's starting a tech company. It's going to be huge, like the next Facebook huge." "What does the company do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Jay waved his hand dismissively. "It's complicated, something with blockchain and AI. But that's not important. What's important is that we have the chance to get in on the ground floor." When I pressed for more details, the story started to fall apart. This amazing opportunity would require an investment of $200,000, but Ryan couldn't provide a business plan because the idea was too valuable to put on paper. Any questions I asked were met with increasingly agitated responses from Jay. "Why can't you just trust me on this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This could be our big break." "Our big break?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Jay, we already had our big break. That's why we have this money in the first place." "Yeah, your money," he spat. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? You don't want to share. You want to keep it all to yourself." The argument escalated from there. Jay accused me of being selfish, of not believing in him, of trying to hold him back. When I suggested that maybe Mike and his friends were taking advantage of him, he exploded. "You're just jealous because I have friends who believe in me," he shouted, grabbing his keys. "Unlike you, they can see my potential." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the pictures on the wall rattled. I sat in the silence of our apartment, feeling completely drained. How had we gotten here? Just a few months ago, we'd been talking about our future together, and now I barely recognized the man I'd fallen in love with. Jay didn't come home that night, or the next. He wasn't answering my calls or texts. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to worst-case scenarios. Was he okay? Had he gotten into an accident? Was he with someone else? On the third day, my mother called. "I heard Jay moved out," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "I always said he wasn't good enough for you. But don't worry, sweetie, you'll find someone else. Someone more stable." I hadn't told anyone about our fight, which meant Jay must have been talking to people about it. The thought made me feel sick. "He hasn't moved out," I said firmly. "We're just going through a rough patch." "Well, when you're ready to move on, I know this lovely young man from church. His family owns a successful business." I cut her off, making an excuse about a work emergency. As soon as I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from Karen. "Heard about Jay, guess you'll have more resources to help family now." I turned off my phone. Jay finally came home 5 days after our fight. He looked terrible, unshaven, clothes wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. We sat at the kitchen table, the space between us feeling like an ocean. "I've been staying at Mike's," he said, though I hadn't asked. "Doing a lot of thinking." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I think." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I think maybe we want different things." The conversation that followed was long and painful. Jay talked about feeling emasculated by my success, about how he'd always dreamed of being the provider. I talked about feeling like I couldn't trust him anymore, about how money seemed to have changed him. "Maybe it changed both of us," he said softly. In the end, we decided to break up. It wasn't just about the money, not really. The lottery win had just exposed cracks that had always been there, turning hairline fractures into canyons. Jay moved out the next day, taking only his personal belongings and the TV he'd bought. I insisted he also take some money, $50,000, which felt both too much and not enough for 3 years of shared dreams. "I'm sorry," he said as he stood in the doorway one last time. "I hope you find what you're looking for." "You too," I replied, and I meant it. In the weeks that followed, I tried to put my life back together. I hired a financial advisor, a no-nonsense woman named Rachel who helped me create a solid investment plan. I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Anderson, to help me process everything that had happened. My family's reaction to the breakup was exactly what I'd expected. My mother increased her calls, each one featuring a not-so-subtle reminder of their financial needs and a suggestion about a potential new boyfriend. Karen alternated between sympathetic messages about how I deserved better and pointed comments about family loyalty. My father mostly stayed quiet, but occasionally called to say things like, "Your mother is really worried about you," which was his way of applying pressure. I began to distance myself from them, screening calls and making excuses to avoid family gatherings. It hurt, but not as much as their constant attempts to manipulate me. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, staying late at the office and taking on extra assignments. My boss, noticing my increased dedication, offered me a promotion to senior designer. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now that I didn't necessarily need the money, my career was taking off. Some of my coworkers had heard about my lottery win. News like that never stays secret for long in an office. Most were kind, but I noticed some treated me differently. Janet from accounting, who'd never given me the time of day before, suddenly wanted to go for coffee and talk about her son's startup. Mark from IT cornered me in the break room to pitch his app idea. I started taking different routes to my desk, timing my lunch breaks to avoid people. The only person who treated me normally was Angela, a junior copywriter who'd started around the same time as me. "You know what the problem is," she said one evening as we worked late on a project. "People see money as the solution to all their problems. They think if they just had more of it, everything would be perfect." I looked up from my computer. "And you don't?" She shrugged. "Money's just a tool. It can make your life easier in some ways, harder in others. But at the end of the day, it's what you do with it that matters." Her words stayed with me, making me think about what I really wanted to do with my windfall. The financial advisor had helped me invest most of it wisely, ensuring I'd have security for the future. But I still had some left, and I wanted to use it in a way that felt meaningful. I thought about my childhood, about how art had been my escape when things were difficult at home. The local community center where I'd taken my first drawing classes had closed down years ago due to lack of funding. Maybe there was something I could do there. I reached out to the city council and learned that the building was still owned by the city but had fallen into disrepair. With some of my lottery money and a matching grant from the city, we could renovate it and restart art programs for kids and adults in the community. It took months of planning, paperwork, and renovation, but finally, the Sarah Mitchell Art Center opened its doors. I kept my name off the building, listed only as an anonymous donor, but being there for the opening day felt more rewarding than any luxury purchase could have been. As I watched children and adults alike explore the new space, picking up brushes and pencils with excitement, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before winning the lottery. My therapist, Dr. Anderson, had helped me understand that it wasn't the money that had caused all my problems, it had just revealed the true nature of some relationships in my life. I ran into Jay about a year after our breakup. He looked good, more like his old self. He'd gone back to software development and started his own small consulting firm, without any get-rich-quick schemes or questionable investors. We had coffee, and while there was some awkwardness, we were able to talk honestly about what had happened. "I'm sorry I lost myself for a while there," he said. "The money. It made me crazy. Made me think I could be someone I'm not." I nodded, understanding completely. It has a way of doing that. As for my family, we've reached a kind of détente. I've set clear boundaries about money, and while they're not happy about it, they've learned to respect them, mostly. My mother still occasionally sends me links to news articles about lottery winners who lost everything, which I've learned to ignore. The lottery wasn't the dream come true I thought it would be. Instead, it was a harsh wake-up call, showing me who people really were, including myself. I lost some relationships, but the ones that remained were stronger, more genuine. And though the money changed my life, it wasn't in the way I'd expected. Sometimes, when I'm at the art center watching people discover or rediscover their creativity, I think about that day at Wilson's Corner store. If I could go back, would I still buy that ticket? Despite everything that happened, I think I would. Because while winning the lottery cost me some illusions about my life, it also gave me something more valuable, the truth about what really matters. I may have lost the dream of what I thought wealth would bring, but I gained something far more precious, the reality of who I am and what I truly value. And that, as it turns out, is worth more than any lottery jackpot.